Number 1. The Kennedy family. Some bloodlines seem utterly blessed by fate, while others appear deeply and inexplicably doomed. For decades, the Kennedys were the closest thing the United States ever had to royalty. They possessed limitless wealth, blinding charisma, and unmatched political power. They were the golden family, flashing brilliant smiles for the cameras, sailing off the coast of Massachusetts, and charting a course for the highest office in the land. But beneath the polished surface of American supremacy, a dark, heavy shadow was waiting to claim them, one by one. The nightmare began in broad daylight in 1963. President John F. Kennedy was riding through Dallas, Texas, waving to a sea of adoring crowds, when the unthinkable happened. A public assassination shattered the illusion of their invincibility, leaving a young nation in mourning and a powerful dynasty suddenly vulnerable. It was the first undeniable strike of what the public would soon begin to whisper was a relentless family curse. If you are fascinated by the hidden shadows behind power, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we uncover these chilling histories. Looking at the footage of that fateful day in Dallas, do you think immense power naturally attracts this kind of tragic gravity? Or was it simply a matter of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this mystery already has you gripped, please drop a like on this video. You will need to brace yourself, because the shadow that swallowed the president was already moving swiftly toward his brother. 5 years after the trauma of Dallas, the nation was bleeding from social unrest, and the Kennedy family was desperately trying to rebuild its shattered legacy. The heavy crown of hope fell onto the shoulders of the president's younger brother, Robert F. Kennedy. He was passionate, driven, and seemingly unstoppable as he surged forward in the 1968 presidential race. It felt like a triumphant return to glory, a chance to rewrite the tragic narrative that had consumed their family name. But the universe has a terrifying way of repeating its darkest chapters. On a crowded, chaotic night in Los Angeles, just moments after declaring a crucial victory, Robert was gunned down. Another brother lost. Another assassination. Another unbearable public funeral. The sheer mathematical odds of two brothers facing the exact same horrific fate on the national stage are staggering. The public stopped seeing them merely as a political dynasty and began viewing them as victims of a supernatural vendetta. The Kennedy curse was no longer just a whispered rumor, it felt like a documented, inescapable reality. Have you ever experienced a moment in your own life where bad luck felt almost orchestrated, as if an invisible force was working against you? Tell me about it down below in the comments. Please leave a like if the sheer weight of this family's sorrow is pulling you into the mystery. Just wait, because the next tragedy would not be an assassination, but a dark, shameful secret buried beneath dark waters. By 1969, the golden aura surrounding the surviving Kennedys had begun to rot from the inside out. The focus shifted to the youngest brother, Ted Kennedy. Until now, the family had been seen as tragic victims of cruel fate, but a humid summer night in Massachusetts would change that perception forever. Ted was driving late at night when his car careened off a narrow bridge and plunged deep into the murky waters of Chappaquiddick Island. Ted managed to escape the submerged vehicle and swim to safety. But his passenger, a 28-year-old woman named Mary Jo Kopech, did not. She was left behind in the sinking wreckage. What makes this event truly chilling is not just the accident itself, but the silence that followed. Ted Kennedy did not report the crash to the police for 10 agonizing hours. By the time authorities arrived, Mary Jo had drowned. The family's wealth and immense political influence quickly moved to shield him from severe consequences, leaving the public with haunting, unanswered questions about what really happened in the dark that night. If you were the one who survived a terrifying accident, could you ever justify waiting 10 hours to call for help while someone else was trapped? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. And if this dark turn in the Dynasties story has you entirely hooked, hit that like button for me. The water took its toll that night, but decades later, the sky would return to claim the final heir. Fast forward to the summer of 1999. A completely new generation had grown up, and the world's adoring eyes were fixed tightly on John F. Kennedy Jr., the charismatic son of the slain president. He was the Golden Prince reborn, completely detached from the severe political scandals and the dark waters of his uncle's past. He was a capable pilot, flying his own private plane across the Atlantic Ocean on a hazy July evening. His beautiful wife and her younger sister were by his side. It was supposed to be a joyful, routine flight to a family wedding. But the heavy fog rolled in relentlessly, disorienting his senses and blinding him to the horizon line. The plane spiraled out of control and crashed violently into the cold ocean below, instantly killing all 3 innocent passengers on board. The dark and unforgiving waters swallowed the last great hope of the Kennedy dynasty in an instant. The curse had traveled silently through time, spanning across generations, easily bypassing tight security details, vast wealth, and unmatched political power. It proved definitively that no amount of money can ever buy immunity from a doomed fate. The Kennedy name will forever be etched into history as a symbol of immense power, matched only by an equally insurmountable grief. Their reign was brilliant, but their fall was catastrophic. Yet, as tragic as their story remains today, there is another American dynasty whose unimaginable billions could not save a captive teenage boy from the bloody blade of ruthless kidnappers in a foreign land. Number 2. The Getty family. The unimaginable billions belonging to J. Paul Getty could not save his captive teenage grandson from the bloody blade of ruthless kidnappers in a foreign land. By 1966, J. Paul Getty was officially the richest man on the entire planet. His staggering net worth was $1.2 billion, an oil empire fortune that equates to nearly $11 billion today. The Getty name represented the absolute pinnacle of American success and luxury. But behind the guarded gates of his estates, that vast fortune had bred severe paranoia, extreme stinginess, and a chilling lack of basic empathy. The true cost of this toxic greed would soon be paid by an innocent child. The nightmare began in the dark hours of 1973. John Paul Getty III, the billionaire's 16-year-old grandson, was walking down the cobbled streets of Rome when he was violently snatched from the sidewalk. He was swallowed by the shadows of the Italian criminal underworld in an instant. Shortly after, a terrifying message arrived for the family, demanding a $17 million ransom for the terrified boy's safe return. If you had billions of dollars in the bank, would you hesitate for even a single second to pay off kidnappers to save your own grandchild? Tell me your honest answer down in the comments. Please drop a like on this video if this sinister tale of wealth and danger has you hooked. You might assume the richest man alive would simply write the check immediately, but his actual, cold-blooded response shocked the world. When the ransom demand reached the desk of J. Paul Getty, the response was not panic, nor was it a desperate rush to save his flesh and blood. It was a cold, calculated business decision. Despite having more money than most nations, the patriarch flatly refused to pay a single penny to the kidnappers. He stood before the media and delivered a chilling rationale that still echoes today. He calmly stated that he had 14 other grandchildren, and if he paid even 1 cent of ransom now, he would suddenly have 14 kidnapped grandchildren. To him, $17 million was simply a bad investment, a dangerous precedent that would put a permanent target on his entire bloodline. While Getty aggressively protected his bank accounts from his sprawling mansion, his teenage grandson endured psychological torment. The boy was kept chained in a cold mountain cave in southern Italy, completely isolated from the world. As the agonizing months dragged on without any payment, the captors grew increasingly impatient and furious. Their threats escalated from mere words to promises of extreme physical violence. Do you think Getty's logic about protecting his other grandchildren was sound, or was it just a cruel excuse to protect his massive fortune? Let me know your perspective in the comments section below. Make sure to leave a like if the tension of this terrifying standoff is keeping you on the edge of your seat. The captors realized they needed to send a gruesome message that could not be ignored, and they chose a horrific method to deliver it. The desperate criminals decided that negotiations were over. In November of 1973, a daily newspaper in Rome received a horrifying package in the mail. Inside was a lock of reddish hair and a severed human ear. It belonged to the young John Paul Getty III. The accompanying note was dripping with pure malice, stating that if the family did not pay immediately, the boy would arrive in small pieces. The grisly arrival of his grandson's mutilated body part finally forced the billionaire to open his tightly sealed wallet, but even in the face of unspeakable horror, his absolute greed dictated the terms. The captors had lowered the demand, but Getty still refused to cover the full amount. He coldly agreed to pay a maximum of $2.2 million. Why that specific number? Because his accountants informed him that $2.2 million was the absolute maximum amount he could legally claim as a tax deduction. He then agreed to provide the remaining funds needed to secure the boy's release, but only as a formal loan to his own desperate son, explicitly charging him a strict 4% interest rate. If your own father charged you interest on a loan meant to save your child's life, could you ever bring yourself to speak to him again? Share your thoughts with me in the comments below. And if this astonishing display of greed has left you speechless, hit that like button right now. The boy was finally freed, but the trauma of his grandfather's betrayal would trigger a devastating downward spiral. John Paul Getty III was finally released alive, found shivering at an abandoned gas station in the freezing rain. But the teenage boy who returned was not the same one who had been taken. He was fundamentally broken, deeply scarred by months of terror, and the agonizing realization that his own family valued their bank accounts more than his life. In a heartbreaking attempt at closure, the young man called his billionaire grandfather to simply say thank you for paying the ransom. Paul Getty entirely refused to come to the phone. That final, devastating rejection pushed the young heir over the edge. Seeking an escape from his immense psychological pain, he fell completely into the dark embrace of heavy drug addiction. Just a few years later, a severe drug overdose caused a massive stroke, leaving him permanently paralyzed, nearly blind, and confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his tragic life until his death. The immense Getty fortune, meant to secure a legendary dynasty, instead became an unbreakable curse of isolation, profound depression, and generational misery. It proved that the most dangerous monsters are not always the criminals hiding in the shadows, but sometimes the very people sitting at the head of the family dinner table. Yet, while the Gettys destroyed their own bloodline through selfish greed, there is another powerful American family who chose to protect their wealth by secretly releasing a highly addictive poison into the market, directly causing the tragic deaths of over 500,000 innocent people. Number 3. The Sackler family. The poison they released was disguised as a miracle medicine, and the architects of this unprecedented tragedy were none other than the Sackler family. Most wealthy dynasties build their empires on oil, real estate, or banking. But this particular family constructed their immense fortune on something far more sinister. They built a kingdom on physical pain, and eventually, on the graves of the innocent people they promised to cure. The grand deception officially began in 1996 when their privately owned company, Purdue Pharma, launched a brand new painkiller called OxyContin. It was aggressively marketed to doctors and everyday patients as a revolutionary medical breakthrough. Their persuasive sales pitch guaranteed that this powerful drug was entirely safe and completely non-addictive. But behind the locked doors of their pristine corporate boardrooms, the family already knew the terrifying truth. They were fully aware that this deeply addictive narcotic could easily destroy the human brain's natural chemistry. Yet they pushed it out into the world anyway, prioritizing a relentless stream of profits over the safety of the public. They successfully used their trusted name to convince the medical establishment to overprescribe this dangerous pill for everything from minor backaches to routine dental work, deliberately ignoring the early warning signs. If you discovered that a trusted medicine was secretly designed to keep you hooked, who would you blame first, your doctor or the billionaire manufacturer? Let me know down in the comments. Please drop a like if this corporate betrayal makes your blood run cold. Just wait, because the resulting wave of destruction would soon trigger an unimaginable national nightmare. As the new millennium dawned, the terrifying consequences of the Sackler family's master plan began to surface in every corner of the country. OxyContin flooded small towns, quiet suburbs, and major cities alike. People who had simply taken the drug for minor injuries quickly found themselves trapped in a vicious cycle of severe chemical dependency. Between 1999 and 2020, an opioid epidemic of catastrophic proportions swept through the nation, leaving a trail of absolute devastation in its wake. The grim statistics are almost too massive to fully comprehend. Over 500,000 innocent people lost their lives to prescription opiate overdoses during that incredibly dark period. Entire communities were completely hollowed out and families were permanently shattered, all while Purdue Pharma continued to rake in billions. Even as the horrifying death toll climbed higher every single month, the company instructed its aggressive sales force to push doctors for even higher patient dosages. They callously blamed the victims for abusing the drug, entirely refusing to admit that the pill itself was engineered for addiction. The streets were filling with tragedy, but the Sackler family simply watched their bank accounts grow from the safety of their guarded mansions. Do you believe that corporate executives should face murder charges when their products intentionally cause mass casualties on this scale? Share your honest opinion in the comments section below. And if the sheer weight of this human tragedy breaks your heart, please leave a like on this video. The authorities finally started closing in, but the billionaires were already executing a deeply cynical escape plan. By the time the government and furious public finally cornered them with an avalanche of massive lawsuits, the Sackler family had already seen the writing on the wall. They knew their pharmaceutical empire was inevitably going to collapse under the weight of thousands of legal claims from grieving families. But instead of facing the music and using their vast wealth to repair the unimaginable damage they had caused, they orchestrated one of the greatest financial disappearing acts in modern history. Before officially allowing Purdue Pharma to declare bankruptcy, the family quietly siphoned an estimated $10.4 billion out of the company. They transferred this staggering fortune directly into their own personal offshore bank accounts and complex family trusts. When the company finally went under, the victims were left to fight over the remaining scraps, while the Sackler family members personally kept their billions completely shielded from the devastating legal fallout. They managed to navigate the complex justice system without a single family member stepping foot inside a jail cell for the 500,000 lives destroyed by their product. The ultimate dark secret of this dynasty was the horrifying reality that enough money can successfully buy immunity from almost any crime. Does knowing that billionaires can legally hide their fortunes to avoid paying their victims make you lose faith in our justice system? Let me know your perspective in the comments below. Please hit that like button if you are truly outraged by this calculated financial evasion. The billions were safe, but their prestigious family name was about to be permanently erased from high society. For decades, the Sackler name was synonymous with elite high society, printed in bold gold letters across the walls of the world's most prestigious art museums, medical schools, and Ivy League universities. They spent a massive portion of their blood money trying to buy an immaculate, philanthropic reputation. But as the horrifying truth about OxyContin and their deceitful business practices became undeniable, a global reckoning finally arrived. Institutions that once gladly accepted their multi-million-dollar donations suddenly rushed to sever all ties. From the Louvre in Paris to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Sackler name was unceremoniously ripped down, chiseled off stone walls, and scrubbed from public view forever. They were banished from the elite social circles they so desperately tried to impress. They still possessed their hoarded billions, hiding in absolute disgrace in their sprawling mansions, entirely insulated by their wealth but forever branded as global pariahs. The dynasty traded 500,000 human lives for a mountain of cash, only to realize their legacy would forever be synonymous with one of the deadliest man-made plagues in modern history. Their money could not save their reputation, proving that the brightest public facades often hide the darkest, most unforgivable secrets. Yet, while the Sacklers destroyed millions of strangers for corporate profit, there is another incredibly wealthy family whose darkest secrets were hidden deep within their own bloodline, involving an eccentric oil tycoon and a famous Hollywood heir who harbored terrifying, cannibalistic desires behind closed doors. Number 4. The Hammer Family. While the Sacklers destroyed millions of strangers for corporate profit, the Hammer family hid their terrifying secrets deep within their own bloodline, involving an eccentric oil tycoon and a Hollywood heir who harbored horrific, cannibalistic desires behind closed doors. Armand Hammer was a legendary figure in the American oil industry, a titan who seemingly conquered the globe with Occidental petroleum. To the outside world, he was an untouchable billionaire, a man who rubbed shoulders with world leaders and painted a picture of absolute financial supremacy. When he passed away in 1990, the public was led to believe he had left behind a staggering fortune of $800 million, cementing a royal legacy for his descendants. But the glittering facade of his empire was built on a fragile foundation of deception, shadow deals, and aggressive smoke and mirrors. Behind the velvet curtains of his massive estate, the reality of the Hammer dynasty was far darker than anyone could have ever imagined. It was discovered that the tycoon left behind a shocking trail of hidden debts, secret lawsuits, and financial chaos that threatened to entirely consume the family name. If you discovered your family's legendary wealth was actually a massive lie built on secret debts, would you try to maintain the illusion or expose the truth? Tell me what you would do down in the comments. Please drop a like on this video if this unraveling empire has captured your attention. But the financial deception of the patriarch was merely the prelude to a much more disturbing, psychological darkness waiting to infect the next generation. For years, it seemed as though the youngest heir might actually escape the toxic shadow of his ancestors and build a legitimate legacy of his own. Armie Hammer, the great-grandson of the deceitful oil baron, possessed all the classic traits of an American golden boy. He was tall, exceptionally handsome, and incredibly charismatic, quickly climbing the ranks of Hollywood to become an A-list leading man. He starred in massive blockbuster films and critically acclaimed dramas, presenting a perfectly polished image to his millions of adoring fans. On the surface, he was the ultimate success story, a man who had traded the murky, corrupt world of international oil for the glittering lights of the silver screen. He married a beautiful television personality, had a picture-perfect family, and lived a life of seemingly untouchable glamour. The public completely bought into the fantasy, oblivious to the fact that the generational sickness of the Hammer dynasty was silently mutating within him. Behind the charming smiles he flashed on the red carpet, a deeply disturbed alter ego was growing, feeding on twisted fantasies that defied all basic human morality. Do you believe that generational trauma and dark family traits can physically pass down through bloodlines? Or does every individual completely shape their own psychological destiny? Share your deepest thoughts on this with me in the comments section below. Make sure to hit that like button if the sinister duality of this Hollywood star is keeping you totally engaged. The perfect facade was about to shatter completely, exposing a monstrous reality that would shock the entire world to its core. The turning point arrived in 2021, hitting the entertainment industry like a devastating earthquake. A series of deeply private, unverified Instagram messages allegedly sent by Armie Hammer began to leak across the internet, sparking a global frenzy. The contents of these messages were not just standard Hollywood scandals involving affairs or money. They were unspeakably dark, graphic, and profoundly disturbing. In these chilling texts, the actor described extreme fantasies of psychological abuse, violent domination, and physical mutilation. But the most horrifying revelation of all was a message where he bluntly stated, "I am 100% a cannibal. I want to eat you." The internet recoiled in absolute horror as more women bravely stepped forward, sharing similar, terrifying stories of their encounters with the disgraced star. The man who had portrayed perfectly charming princes and romantic heroes on screen was suddenly accused of harboring the darkest, most predatory desires imaginable. The public was forced to reconcile the handsome face they loved with the monstrous actions described in the leaks. The golden boy image evaporated overnight, replaced by the terrifying specter of a man consumed by his own twisted impulses. If you found out a celebrity you deeply admired was secretly hiding such violent and disturbing desires, would you ever be able to watch their movies the same way again? Let me know your reaction in the comments below. Please drop a like right now if this horrifying revelation sent a cold shiver straight down your spine. The swift and brutal downfall of the Hammer heir would leave him exiled in a tropical paradise, desperately trying to survive. The fallout from the explosive scandal was absolute and entirely unforgiving. Hollywood, an industry known for forgiving almost anything, immediately severed all ties with the disgraced actor. Armie Hammer was unceremoniously dropped by his powerful talent agency, fired from every single upcoming film production, and completely blacklisted from the entertainment world. His lucrative career, carefully crafted public persona, and massive wealth vanished instantly into thin air. He fled the intense media scrutiny of Los Angeles, retreating to the isolated shores of the Cayman Islands. There, the former A-list star and great-grandson of a billionaire oil tycoon was eventually spotted working a surprisingly mundane job, desperately trying to sell real estate timeshares to passing tourists just to make ends meet. The majestic Hammer dynasty, which had once commanded unimaginable global power, political influence, and immense wealth, had been reduced to a profound global punchline. The family curse was not a supernatural spell, but a deeply rooted rot of deception, unchecked privilege, and psychological decay that finally consumed its brightest star. They proved that no amount of Hollywood glamour can permanently hide the terrifying monsters lurking within a doomed bloodline. Yet, as catastrophic as this Hollywood downfall was, there is another incredibly powerful American family from the Deep South who used their 86-year legal reign to steal millions from vulnerable clients. A corrupt dynasty that only ended when a desperate father brutally gunned down his own wife and son to hide his unforgivable financial crimes. Number 5. The Murdaugh family. The deep, humid swamps of South Carolina hold countless dark secrets, but none are as chilling as the sudden, bloody collapse of the Murdaugh dynasty. For an astonishing 86 consecutive years, spanning from 1920 to 2006, this single family completely controlled the law and order of the 14th Circuit. They were not just practicing attorneys. They were the absolute, undisputed rulers of their region, holding the powerful position of chief prosecutor for unbroken generations. In this isolated stretch of the Lowcountry, the Murdaugh name was practically synonymous with the law itself. They possessed unparalleled power to decide who went to jail, who walked entirely free, and who received massive legal payouts. To the local citizens, they appeared as untouchable aristocrats living on sprawling estates. But behind the distinguished portraits and polished courtroom performances, a terrifying culture of corruption had taken deep root. The modern patriarch, Alex Murdaugh, inherited this immense generational power, but he also harbored an insatiable, reckless greed that would eventually tear his world apart. He used his trusted family name to build a hidden empire of deceit, systematically preying on the very people he was legally sworn to protect. If you held absolute power in your town for nearly a century, do you think your family would remain honest, or would that unchecked authority inevitably corrupt your bloodline? Share your honest opinion in the comments below. Please drop a like on this video if this tale of absolute corruption has drawn you in. But this staggering financial theft was only the beginning of a descent into pure evil. Behind the closed doors of his prestigious law firm, Alex Murdaugh operated a sophisticated and merciless financial scheme. He did not steal from faceless corporations. He stole directly from the most severely vulnerable people in his community. When working-class citizens suffered horrific, life-altering accidents, they trusted the legendary Murdaugh name to fight for their justice. Alex would successfully win massive settlements for these grieving families, but the victims rarely saw a single dime. Instead, he quietly funneled over $8.5 million into his own secret bank accounts. He used the stolen funds to finance a luxurious lifestyle, complete with private hunting lodges, expensive boats, and a crippling, hidden addiction to prescription pills. For years, his incredible legal influence and deeply rooted community connections kept the local police and banks from asking any serious questions. He felt completely invincible, convinced that the laws he manipulated for a living simply did not apply to his own bloodline. But eventually, the massive mountain of lies became far too heavy to balance. The walls began to rapidly close in as his law partners and targeted financial investigators finally started untangling his massive web of stolen checks. Do you think you could look a grieving family in the eye and pretend to help them while secretly stealing their entire financial future? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if this sickening betrayal of trust makes you angry, please hit that like button. The financial pressure was crushing him, leading him to execute an unimaginably dark and violent solution. On the warm, quiet evening of June 7, 2021, the carefully constructed empire of the Murdaugh dynasty finally shattered in a horrific display of absolute carnage. Knowing his massive financial crimes were on the absolute brink of public exposure, Alex Murdaugh made a chilling, calculated decision. He lured his own wife, Maggie, and his youngest son, Paul, to the secluded dog kennels on their sprawling country estate. There, under the dark cover of night, he picked up a shotgun and an assault rifle. In a desperate, cold-blooded bid to suddenly derail the financial investigations and buy himself overwhelming public sympathy, he ruthlessly gunned down his own flesh and blood. The brutal double murder sent immediate shockwaves through the entire country. At first, Alex played the role of the devastated, grieving patriarch perfectly, sobbing on the phone to emergency dispatchers and blaming the horrific murders on mysterious, unknown attackers seeking revenge against his son. He believed his powerful family name would shield him from suspicion, just as it always had for nearly a century. He assumed the local police would simply accept his tragic narrative without question. If you were an investigator in a small town, would you have the courage to treat the most powerful, legally connected man in the county as a prime murder suspect? Share your perspective with me in the comments below. Make sure to drop a like if the sheer coldness of this calculated double murder leaves you entirely speechless. But the golden shield of the Murdaugh legacy was finally breaking under the weight of forensic truth. Despite his desperate attempts to manipulate the crime scene and control the local narrative, the digital forensic evidence was simply too loud to ignore. Cell phone data, hidden timeline discrepancies, and undeniable financial records painted a terrifying picture of a desperate man backed completely into a dark corner. The once untouchable legal king of the South Carolina Lowcountry was eventually placed in tight handcuffs, stripped of his expensive suits, and forced to stand trial for the unthinkable slaughter of his own family. In 2023, the very courtroom that his proud ancestors had completely dominated for 86 years finally delivered true, impartial justice. Alex Murdaugh was ultimately found guilty and handed 2 consecutive life sentences, permanently ensuring he would spend the rest of his natural life rotting inside a cold, concrete cell. The sprawling dynasty that had proudly ruled the region for nearly a century was completely incinerated in a blinding flash of greed, lies, and brutal shotgun fire. The Murdaugh name, once a symbol of unmatched power and legal protection, became globally synonymous with ultimate betrayal and unfathomable violence. It proved that when unchecked power and boundless greed are allowed to fester in the dark, they will eventually consume the very family that created them. Yet, as gruesome as this legal dynasty's violent collapse was, there is another incredibly wealthy American family who built their massive $14 billion fortune on gunpowder and explosives, a legacy that ultimately detonated when a severely mentally ill billionaire heir hunted down and murdered an Olympic gold medalist on his own private estate. Number 6. The DuPont family. The staggering $14 billion fortune built on the explosive power of gunpowder ultimately detonated from within, triggered by a billionaire heir who murdered an Olympic gold medalist on his private estate. Long before modern tech billionaires and Wall Street titans, there were the DuPonts. Established in 1802, they are one of the oldest and most aristocratic dynasties in the United States. They amassed an unimaginable empire by manufacturing explosives, chemicals, and the very materials that built the modern world. For over 2 centuries, their wealth shielded them entirely from the rules that governed ordinary society. They lived in palatial estates across the East Coast, isolated within a bubble of absolute privilege and closely guarded secrecy. But immense generational wealth often acts as an incubator for profound psychological decay. By the late 20th century, the immense pressure and isolation of the dynasty had severely twisted the mind of a prominent heir named John DuPont. He was a man with unlimited financial resources but a rapidly deteriorating grip on reality. He transformed his massive, 800-acre property, known as Foxcatcher Farm, into his own bizarre, private kingdom where his every delusion was funded and enabled by his vast fortune. Do you think possessing unlimited wealth from birth naturally isolates a person from reality, or does it simply magnify the mental instability they already possess? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Please drop a like on this video if the dark underbelly of this historical dynasty is pulling you in. But his extravagant eccentricities were about to cross a terrifying line into a deadly, controlling obsession. John DuPont suffered from severe, untreated schizophrenia, but because he controlled the purse strings of an American empire, no one around him dared to intervene. Instead of seeking psychiatric help, he used his millions to buy something money was never meant to purchase: athletic glory. Deeply obsessed with wrestling, he built a state-of-the-art training facility right on the grounds of Foxcatcher farm. He essentially bought his way into the wrestling community, offering massive stipends and free housing to the country's greatest athletes. One of the men drawn into this gilded cage was Dave Schultz, a beloved, 36-year-old Olympic gold medalist. Dave was a legend in the sport, a devoted family man who moved his wife and children onto the estate, completely unaware of the extreme danger lurking behind his billionaire benefactor's awkward smiles. As the years passed, DuPont's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would wander the vast estate armed with firearms, driven by intense paranoia and dark, invisible enemies. He believed international spies were hiding in the walls, and he began treating the athletes not as guests, but as his own personal property. If you were offered a dream job with a massive salary, but your boss displayed terrifying and erratic behavior, how long would you stay before walking away? Share your perspective in the comments section below. And if the rising tension on this isolated estate is giving you chills, please hit that like button. The tragic breaking point arrived entirely without warning on a freezing, quiet winter afternoon. In 1996, the heavily guarded gates of Foxcatcher Farm became the backdrop for an utterly senseless execution. There was no heated argument, no dramatic betrayal, and absolutely no logical motive. John DuPont, entirely consumed by the darkest depths of his mental illness, slowly drove his vehicle down the snow-covered driveway and stopped directly in front of Dave Schultz's guest house. Dave was outside, innocently installing a radio in his car, and greeted his wealthy landlord with a friendly smile. In response, the billionaire heir raised a Magnum revolver and shot the beloved Olympic champion at point-blank range. Dave collapsed into the freezing snow as his terrified wife ran out, screaming in absolute horror. DuPont simply stared at her, completely devoid of human emotion, before turning his car around and driving back to his fortress-like mansion. The brutal murder of an American hero by one of the wealthiest men in the country sent shockwaves around the world. DuPont then barricaded himself inside his heavily armed estate, triggering a massive standoff with police tactical units that lasted for 2 agonizing days. The billionaire truly believed his limitless wealth made him entirely untouchable. If you witnessed a completely unprovoked crime committed by someone extremely powerful, would you fear for your own life or immediately try to intervene? Let me know your honest thoughts down below. Please leave a like if the cold-blooded nature of this tragedy has left you entirely stunned. The police eventually breached the walls, but the profound damage to the dynasty was permanent. The heavily armed tactical teams finally managed to lure the delusional billionaire out of his mansion by simply turning off the estate's massive heating system in the dead of winter. John DuPont was captured, handcuffed, and dragged from his aristocratic paradise into a cold, concrete reality. During the highly publicized trial, his expensive defense team aggressively pushed for a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. But the jury saw past the billions and recognized the chilling reality of a man who knew exactly what he was doing when he pulled the trigger. He was convicted of third-degree murder and handed a maximum sentence of 30 years behind bars. The man who had once possessed enough wealth to buy anything on the planet spent the final 14 years of his life locked inside a grim state penitentiary, where his $14 billion family fortune could not afford him a single shred of freedom. He died in prison in 2010, alone and entirely disgraced. The historic DuPont legacy, which had survived for over 2 centuries as a shining pillar of American industry, was permanently stained with the blood of an innocent champion. It proved that generational wealth might build impenetrable fortresses, but it cannot cure a deeply diseased mind. Yet, while the DuPonts suffered from violent delusions of grandeur, there is another legendary American dynasty that was utterly devastated by a silent, invisible genetic curse, one that drove 5 different family members, including a Nobel Prize-winning author, to tragically take their own lives across 4 heartbreaking generations. Number 7. The Hemingway family. The silent, invisible genetic curse that drove a Nobel Prize-winning author and 4 relatives to tragically take their own lives across 4 generations belongs to the legendary Hemingway family. Unlike the wealthy oil barons whose downfalls were driven by corporate crimes, the Hemingway dynasty was destroyed by an internal, biological shadow. They were artistic royalty, possessing an unmatched depth of creative talent that reshaped global literature. But running parallel to their immense genius was a terrifying predisposition to severe clinical depression and profound mental anguish. The tragic chain reaction of this generational trauma officially began in 1928 with the patriarch, Clarence Hemingway. He was a deeply respected physician, a man who dedicated his life to healing others, yet he could not cure the suffocating darkness within his own mind. Overwhelmed by declining health and crushing stress, he retreated into his home and tragically took his own life with a gunshot. Society largely viewed it as an isolated tragedy born of personal despair. No one predicted this single violent act was the opening sequence of a deeply ingrained family curse that would relentlessly hunt his descendants. Do you believe that severe mental trauma can be directly inherited through genetics, acting like an invisible ticking clock within a family bloodline? Share your deepest thoughts on this in the comments below. Please drop a like on this video if the psychological weight of this tragedy has drawn you in. But the most shocking chapter of this curse was waiting to claim the family's most celebrated star. Following his father's tragic demise, Ernest threw himself entirely into his writing and a life of extreme adventure. He became the ultimate symbol of rugged American masculinity, an international icon who hunted big game, survived plane crashes, and won the Nobel Prize for Literature. To his millions of devoted fans, he was an absolutely invincible force of nature. But beneath the macho facade and the brilliant prose, he was secretly fighting a losing battle against the exact same suffocating darkness that had claimed his father. The intense alcohol abuse only worsened his deeply rooted mental decay. By 1961, the brilliant mind that had captivated the globe was completely ravaged by severe depression, heavy paranoia, and failing physical health. The invincible author had been reduced to a shadow of his former glory, unable to write and terrified of the world. On a quiet morning in Ketchum, Idaho, Ernest picked up his favorite shotgun and ended his own life, mirroring his father's tragic exit. The global shockwave was unprecedented. The world mourned the loss of a literary giant, but for his family, it was a terrifying confirmation that their bloodline was inherently flawed. If you possessed a brilliant, world-changing talent but knew it came attached to an inescapable mental torment, would you still consider it a gift or a cruel punishment? Let me know your honest perspective in the comments section down below. Make sure to hit that like button if the tragic duality of this famous author is keeping you gripped. The nightmare did not stop there, as the relentless shadow quickly turned its attention to his surviving siblings. The devastating loss of Ernest was completely unbearable, but it was only the middle chapter of an ongoing nightmare. The genetic predisposition for severe depression coursed heavily through the veins of his brothers and sisters. 5 years after the legendary author's death, his sister Ursula, struggling silently with overwhelming illness and profound emotional despair, tragically took her own life in 1966 by consuming a lethal overdose. The family was plunged into mourning yet again, watching helplessly as the invisible curse struck down another member. Then, in 1982, the cycle violently repeated itself. Lester Hemingway, Ernest's younger brother and a talented writer in his own right, was diagnosed with severe physical ailments that threatened his mobility. Facing a grim future and entirely consumed by the family's signature darkness, he also shot himself. At this point, the statistical probability of so many suicides within a single immediate family was chillingly rare. It became an undeniable, terrifying reality that the Hemingway name was attached to a deeply embedded psychological time bomb. The sheer weight of this generational trauma hovered over the surviving descendants like a suffocating dark cloud. When multiple members of a single family succumb to the exact same tragic fate, do you think it is purely biological chemistry? Or does the weight of family history push them over the edge? Share your deepest thoughts with me in the comments below. Please leave a like if the relentless, tragic nature of this family curse leaves you completely heartbroken. The curse had wiped out a generation, but it was patiently waiting to strike down a glamorous young heir. The most eerie manifestation of the Hemingway curse arrived in 1996. Margot Hemingway, Ernest's beautiful granddaughter, successfully built a massive career as an internationally renowned supermodel. She graced the glossy covers of prestigious fashion magazines and walked the glamorous runways of Paris and New York. On the surface, she had entirely escaped the dark shadow of her grandfather's tragic legacy. But behind the dazzling camera flashes and the glamorous lifestyle, she was battling the exact same demons of severe clinical depression, crippling anxiety, and intense addiction. The genetic inheritance of the Hemingway dynasty proved entirely inescapable. On the 2nd of July, 1996, Margot was tragically found dead in her California apartment from a deliberate, massive overdose of powerful sedatives. The most chilling detail of this final tragedy was the date itself. Margot took her own life precisely 35 years to the exact day that her grandfather, Ernest Hemingway, had pulled the trigger in Idaho. 5 brilliant, talented people across 4 generations, all entirely consumed by an invisible sickness they could not outrun. Their story is a haunting reminder that no amount of international fame, incredible talent, or massive success can rewrite the deep, unyielding code of our own genetics. Yet, as profoundly sad as this biological tragedy remains, there is another legendary American dynasty that was destroyed not by genetics, but by an absolutely spectacular display of ultimate financial greed, squandering a massive $100 million empire on palaces and parties until every single dime was gone. Number 8. The Vanderbilt family. An absolutely spectacular display of ultimate financial greed squandered their massive $100 million empire on palaces and parties until every single dime was completely gone. In the 19th century, there was absolutely no name in the United States that commanded more sheer financial respect than the Vanderbilts. The dynasty's ruthless patriarch, Cornelius Vanderbilt, constructed a completely unparalleled monopoly over the shipping and railroad industries. He was a notoriously harsh businessman who crushed his rivals without a second thought. When he passed away in 1877, he left behind a staggering personal fortune of $100 million. To put that massive wealth into perspective, Cornelius Vanderbilt personally possessed more money in his private bank accounts than the entire United States Treasury held at that exact time. He had successfully built an empire so massive that it seemed mathematically impossible to destroy. But Cornelius knew the dangerous, reckless nature of his own bloodline, leaving behind a chilling warning that any fool can make a fortune, but it takes a true genius to keep it. The generations that followed him ignored this critical advice, viewing his empire as a bottomless pit of endless cash meant only for their extreme amusement. If you inherited a fortune larger than the national treasury, could you resist the urge to spend it all on luxury? Share your honest thoughts down in the comments. Please drop a like on this video if the sheer scale of this historical wealth has captured your attention. The unimaginable spending spree that followed would quickly transform this family into a devastating cautionary tale. Almost immediately after the patriarch was buried, the vault doors of the Vanderbilt treasury were violently blown wide open. The descendants engaged in an absolutely toxic, deeply destructive competition against each other, desperate to prove who could live the most lavish lifestyle. They abandoned the profitable railroad business and fully immersed themselves in the extravagant glamour of the era. Instead of carefully investing their massive inheritance to secure the bloodline's future, they treated the money like an endless fountain that would never run dry. Their obsession with absolute luxury quickly spiraled completely out of control. They began commissioning enormous megamansions right in the middle of New York City, tearing down whole city blocks just to build private ballrooms. The peak of this architectural insanity was the construction of the Biltmore estate by his grandson. It was built to feature an astonishing 250 separate rooms, making it the largest private residential home ever constructed in American history. It required a small army of dedicated servants just to maintain the sprawling gardens and dust the heavily imported artwork. They were aggressively bleeding their fortune dry to build isolated fantasy castles. Does the idea of living in an isolated mansion with 250 rooms sound like an absolute dream come true, or an incredibly lonely nightmare? Let me know your perspective in the comments section below. Make sure to hit that like button if the arrogance of this spending spree is keeping you entirely gripped. The family was busy dancing in their glittering ballrooms, completely oblivious to the catastrophic financial cliff they were rapidly approaching. The immense fortune was pouring out of their bank accounts faster than the family's neglected businesses could ever hope to replace it. As the money began to slowly evaporate, the once unified dynasty started to bitterly turn against one another. The Vanderbilts initiated ruthless public lawsuits against their own siblings, fighting viciously over remaining trust funds and heavily contested inheritance documents. Rather than slowing down their reckless spending to survive the incoming economic shifts, they actually accelerated it in a desperate bid to maintain their fading public image. They threw famously lavish costume balls that cost millions of dollars for a single evening, insisting that their guests wear authentic historical jewels while the American working class struggled to simply survive. In perhaps their most desperate and expensive move, the Vanderbilt parents began buying royal European titles for their daughters, paying astronomical dowries to broke foreign aristocrats just to attach the word Duchess or princess to the family name. It was an absolute fever dream of pure financial ego, blinding them entirely to the new reality of rising income taxes and a rapidly modernizing industrial world. If you saw your immense family fortune rapidly disappearing, would you immediately cut back your lifestyle to save it, or keep pretending you were rich just to save face? Share your deepest thoughts with me in the comments below. Please leave a like if the sheer stubbornness of this dying dynasty leaves you completely stunned. The final curtain was preparing to fall on this golden era, and a devastating financial reality check would be absolutely merciless. The spectacular and highly public collapse of the Vanderbilt empire remains one of the most astonishing financial disappearing acts in human history. The staggering $100 million that once overshadowed the national treasury evaporated into thin air. It did not take centuries for the curse of greed to consume them. It took merely 50 years to hollow out the greatest private fortune ever recorded in America. Their sprawling New York megamansions were forcefully sold off and unceremoniously demolished to make way for modern office buildings. Their legendary artwork was auctioned away to pay off mounting, insurmountable debts. The ultimate, crushing reality of their complete downfall was fully exposed in 1973. Exactly 120 direct descendants of the Vanderbilt family gathered for a massive family reunion. When the financial status of the guests was quietly assessed, the shocking truth was revealed. Out of all those descendants, carrying the most historically terrifying financial name in the country, there was not a single millionaire left among them. The empire was entirely gone, replaced by faded photographs of palaces they could no longer afford to step inside. Their catastrophic greed proved that wealth without wisdom is simply a countdown to absolute ruin. Yet, while this family carelessly threw away their billions on extravagant parties, another famous American dynasty watched their patriarch drown on the most famous sinking ship in history, only to face an even darker tragedy decades later when a greedy son subjected his own 100-year-old mother to horrific elder abuse just to steal her remaining fortune. Number 9. The Astor family. The patriarch of the Astor dynasty drowned in the freezing waters of the Atlantic, but the family's darkest chapter unfolded decades later when a greedy son subjected his elderly mother to horrific abuse to steal her remaining millions. For generations, the Astor name was synonymous with elite American aristocracy. They built an unimaginable fortune dominating the aggressive real estate market of New York City. Their wealth was so vast it seemed to place them entirely above the tragic fates of ordinary people. But on a freezing April night in 1912, the universe proved that no amount of money could buy a lifeboat to cheat death. John Jacob Astor IV, the reigning head of the empire, stood on the tilting deck of the RMS Titanic as the ocean liner slowly sank. His personal fortune was $87 million, the modern equivalent of nearly $3 billion, making him the wealthiest passenger on the doomed ship. His drowning was a catastrophic blow, yet it was regarded as a noble accident of history. The true curse of the Astor bloodline was not the freezing ocean, but a cold-blooded betrayal that would breed within their own mansions. If you had billions of dollars but knew the ship was sinking, would you try to bribe your way onto a lifeboat or accept your tragic fate? Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments. Please drop a like on this video if the historical tragedy of this family has you captivated. The darkest secret of this empire was waiting patiently to strike a deeply vulnerable widow. Fast forward nearly a century, and the immense weight of the Astor legacy rested on the frail shoulders of Brooke Astor. She was a beloved society figure, a renowned philanthropist who spent decades giving away millions to charitable causes. To the outside world, her life was an absolute fairy tale of high society elegance and generosity. But behind the heavy curtains of her sprawling Park Avenue apartment, a chilling nightmare was slowly suffocating her. By 2007, Brooke had reached the incredible age of 105, but her brilliant mind was being aggressively erased by severe Alzheimer's disease. As her memories faded and her vulnerability increased, the people who should have protected her began to see her not as a mother, but as a heavily guarded bank vault. Her only son, Anthony Marshall, was given total control over her daily care and her massive financial estate. Instead of ensuring her final years were spent in comfort, he launched a deeply callous campaign to secretly drain her accounts before she passed away. He isolated her from the friends who truly loved her, trapping the elderly billionaire in her own home. If you saw a wealthy elderly person being isolated by a controlling family member, would you risk stepping in to investigate? Share your perspective in the comments section below. Make sure to hit that like button if this sinister betrayal of trust makes your blood boil. The conditions inside that luxurious apartment were about to be exposed as a scene of absolute, heartbreaking neglect. The horrifying reality of Brooke Astor's daily existence finally leaked out, shattering the golden illusion of her high society life. Staff members bravely came forward with terrifying reports of severe elder abuse. Despite possessing a fortune that could afford the greatest medical care on the planet, the 100-year-old woman was found sleeping on a filthy couch that smelled of urine. She was deprived of her prescribed medications, denied visits from her dogs, and kept in freezing rooms because her son simply refused to spend her money on adequate heating. While his mother suffered in unimaginable misery, Anthony Marshall was busy manipulating legal documents and forging signatures to steal millions directly from her accounts. In one of his most brazen acts of greed, he took a famous painting off her wall, a masterpiece valued at $5 million, and quickly sold it for a fraction of the price just to pocket the cash. He treated his mother's legacy like a yard sale, stripping away her dignity piece by piece to satisfy his own endless financial appetite. The public was entirely horrified that a dynasty with such historical prestige could rot so violently from the inside. Do you think there is any crime more cowardly than stealing from your own defenseless, elderly mother while she suffers from dementia? Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments. Please leave a like if the sheer cruelty of this greedy son leaves you completely stunned. The authorities finally intervened, leading to a spectacular and highly publicized courtroom showdown. The massive scandal completely tore the elite world of New York society apart. Criminal investigators swooped into the luxurious apartment and aggressively audited the deeply suspicious financial transfers. Anthony Marshall, a man who had grown up surrounded by unimaginable privilege and absolute wealth, was forcefully dragged into a crowded criminal courtroom. The devastating trial completely exposed the darkest, most pathetic underbelly of the Astor dynasty. In 2009, a jury found him officially guilty of grand larceny, a calculated scheme to defraud, and the horrific elder abuse of his own mother. The 85-year-old son was ultimately sentenced to state prison, forced to trade his tailored suits and sprawling estates for a bleak, concrete cell. Brooke Astor sadly passed away, completely unaware of the vicious legal war being fought over the remains of her legendary fortune. The Astor name, which had survived the catastrophic sinking of the Titanic and shaped the very skyline of modern America, ended its most famous chapter in the cold, shameful halls of a criminal courthouse. The family proved that extreme wealth is a dangerous poison that can easily destroy the most sacred bonds of human nature, turning a privileged son into a ruthless predator. Yet, as shameful as this financial betrayal was, there is another legendary American family whose undeniable artistic genius was entirely eclipsed by a dark, generational addiction. forcing a 13-year-old girl to seek refuge in a rehabilitation center just to survive her own tragic bloodline. Number 10. The Barrymore family. Their undeniable artistic genius was eclipsed by a dark, generational addiction, forcing a young girl to seek refuge in a rehabilitation center just to survive her own bloodline. Long before the modern era of blockbuster cinema, the Barrymore family reigned supreme as the absolute royalty of Hollywood. They were a dynasty built on raw, captivating talent, possessing a magnetic charm that mesmerized audiences around the globe. But beneath the dazzling glow of the studio lights and the roaring applause, a terrifying biological shadow was patiently stalking their every move. For generations, this incredibly gifted family harbored a deeply destructive secret, a severe, inescapable predisposition to rampant alcoholism and heavy drug addiction. The stage curtains hid a reality of profound psychological pain that slowly eroded the foundation of their golden empire. They were masters of pretending to be other people on screen, but they could never successfully mask the demons tearing them apart from the inside. The legendary John Barrymore, considered one of the greatest actors of his era, was the most tragic victim of this relentless sickness. He possessed the kind of fame that most performers could only dream of, yet he was completely drowning in a sea of heavy liquor. Do you believe that immense creative genius naturally comes with a heavy predisposition to addiction, or is the extreme pressure of fame what truly drives artists to such dark escapes? Tell me your thoughts down in the comments. Please drop a like on this video if the tragic irony of this Hollywood dynasty has you captivated. The glittering facade was rapidly starting to crack, revealing a man literally drinking his own life away. Despite his undeniable brilliance in front of the cameras, John Barrymore was entirely consumed by his crippling alcohol dependency. His once dashing looks and sharp, theatrical mind were aggressively eroded by years of continuous, unchecked substance abuse. He would frequently arrive on prestigious movie sets completely intoxicated, unable to remember even the simplest lines of dialogue. Directors were forced to write his words on massive cue cards just off-screen to keep the productions moving. The Hollywood studios, desperate to squeeze every last drop of profit from his famous name, quietly enabled his devastating addiction instead of offering genuine help. The alcohol systematically destroyed his internal organs, turning a vibrant leading man into a hollow, tragic shell. In 1942, at the age of just 60, his body finally surrendered to the poison. He died an agonizing death from severe cirrhosis, his liver completely failing after decades of relentless abuse. The public mourned the passing of a legendary talent, but the Barrymore family knew this was not an isolated tragedy. It was the terrifying fulfillment of a generational curse deeply embedded within their genetic code. The poison had taken the patriarch, but the invisible sickness was already searching for a new host within the family tree. If you saw a loved one slowly destroying themselves with an addiction, do you think tough love or endless compassion is the best way to save them? Share your perspective in the comments section below. Make sure to hit that like button if the tragic downfall of this silver screen legend breaks your heart. The deadly cycle was preparing to aggressively repeat itself, aiming directly at an incredibly vulnerable child. Decades after the tragic loss of the legendary patriarch, the terrifying family curse violently resurrected itself, completely consuming his young granddaughter, Drew Barrymore. Born into the glittering chaos of Hollywood, Drew was robbed of a normal childhood. She was thrust into the unforgiving spotlight at an incredibly young age, becoming a global superstar before she even understood what fame truly meant. Instead of being protected, she was aggressively pushed into adult environments, attending wild, substance-fueled celebrity parties while she was still just a little girl. The deep, generational trauma of the Barrymore dynasty quickly took hold of her vulnerable mind. By the tender age of 9, while other children were playing with toys, Drew was already heavily drinking alcohol. The terrifying spiral accelerated with horrifying speed. By the time she was 12 years old, she was deeply addicted to cocaine, desperately using heavy narcotics to numb the immense pressure of her overwhelming reality. She was a child trapped in a terrifyingly adult nightmare, repeating the exact same destructive patterns that had killed her grandfather. The Hollywood machine that worshipped her innocent smile was casually watching her entirely self-destruct in real time. Do you think the entertainment industry is inherently toxic to child stars? Or is it the fault of the parents for putting them in such dangerous environments? Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments. Please leave a like if the horrifying reality of this young girl's stolen childhood leaves you completely stunned. Her life was violently spiraling out of control, leading to a desperate breaking point that few children ever survive. The agonizing climax of this generational curse arrived when Drew Barrymore was only 13 years old. Entirely consumed by her escalating addictions and completely out of control, she was institutionalized and placed into a strict rehabilitation center. It was a dark, terrifying reality for a young teenager, locked away in a medical facility just to survive the toxic inheritance of her own family bloodline. She spent 18 grueling months fighting the exact same relentless demons that had successfully destroyed the generations before her. But in the darkest depths of her forced isolation, she found an unbreakable inner strength. Unlike her grandfather, she categorically refused to let the curse dictate her final chapter. At the astonishingly young age of 14, Drew made the brave, unprecedented decision to legally emancipate herself from her own mother, entirely severing the deeply toxic ties that were pulling her under. She walked away from the destructive Hollywood party scene and slowly, painfully rebuilt her entire life from the ground up. She broke the devastating Barrymore curse through sheer willpower, ultimately transforming herself into a highly successful, sober adult. Her miraculous survival proved that while we cannot choose the terrifying genetic shadows we inherit, we possess the ultimate power to permanently break the chain. Yet, while the Barrymore dynasty fought their darkest demons under the bright studio lights, there is another incredibly powerful American family whose dark secrets lie buried beneath the freezing, murky waters of a remote forest lake, waiting for the truth to float to the brutal surface.